David had always been a hardworking man, balancing the daily struggles of city life with the deep longing to reconnect with his family back home. After months of exhausting work in the bustling city, he finally had the opportunity to visit his parents and siblings in the village. The thought of seeing his mother's warm smile, hearing his father's wise words, and sharing laughter with his younger siblings filled him with excitement. It had been far too long since he had been home, and this journey meant more than just a trip. It was a homecoming, a reminder of his roots, and a chance to rest his weary soul. He packed his small travel bag with care, ensuring he had everything he needed for the trip. His mother had already called him multiple times, reminding him to bring some city groceries and his younger brother's requested gift. He chuckled to himself as he double-checked his bag, feeling a mix of joy and anticipation. His heart was light, but somewhere deep within him, a small seed of unease took root. It was subtle, just a fleeting moment of hesitation, a strange feeling that made him pause before locking his door behind him. He dismissed the feeling quickly, attributing it to exhaustion. It was just another trip, like the many he had taken before. But as he made his way to the bus station, small things seemed off. A black cat darted across his path, causing him to stop momentarily. An elderly woman sitting near the station muttered a soft prayer under her breath, rocking gently as she watched the world pass by. The sky, though bright and sunny, carried a heaviness that made David's skin prickle. Still, he pushed the thoughts aside. He had always considered himself a logical man. His mother, however, had always been the opposite, deeply spiritual, always reminding him to pray before he left the house. "You never know what lies ahead," she would say. "Always cover your journey in prayer." He loved her dearly but often found her warnings to be excessive. Today, for some reason, her voice lingered in his mind longer than usual. As he approached the bus, he noticed people boarding with a mix of emotions, some laughing and chatting, others looking distant and lost in thought. A young mother struggled to calm her crying baby, while an elderly man clutched his rosary tightly, whispering prayers under his breath. The driver, a middle-aged man with a confident smirk, leaned against the bus, chatting casually with a vendor selling roasted maize. David took a deep breath and stepped inside, choosing a window seat near the middle. As the bus roared to life, he leaned back, gazing out the window. His heart was full of excitement, but the nagging feeling of unease remained buried beneath it. Was it just nerves? Or was there something unseen, something beyond human understanding, urging him to pray before embarking on this journey? The night before his journey, David had an unsettling dream. In it, he was sitting in a moving bus, staring out the window as the trees blurred past. The sky was dark, an eerie shade of gray, and the road ahead seemed endless. Suddenly, the bus jerked violently, passengers screamed, and everything spun into chaos. David tried to move, to brace himself, but his body felt paralyzed. The sound of metal screeching filled his ears, followed by a deafening crash. Then, silence. When he opened his eyes, he was standing alone in the middle of the road. The bus was overturned, smoke rising from its wreckage. Shadowy figures moved around him, their faces blurred, their whispers echoing like 1,000 voices in the wind. David jolted awake, his heart pounding. He sat up in bed, wiping the sweat from his forehead. It had only been a dream, but it felt disturbingly real. He shook his head, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. He wasn't one to believe in premonitions or omens. Dreams were just the mind processing random thoughts, weren't they? He convinced himself it was just his excitement and exhaustion playing tricks on him. Morning came, and David prepared for his trip. As he made his way to the bus station, he still couldn't shake the strange feeling from the night before. He told himself he was being foolish, but deep down, something felt off. The streets were unusually quiet, the air thick with an odd stillness. As he approached the station, he spotted an elderly woman sitting near the entrance, her deep-set eyes scanning the passing travelers. She was dressed in a simple yet dignified traditional wrapper, her silver hair neatly tied back. As David passed by, she called out to him, her voice surprisingly strong for her frail appearance. "Son, have you prayed before your journey?" David stopped and turned to her. He offered a polite smile but felt slightly uncomfortable. "I'm in a bit of a hurry, Ma," he said. She shook her head, her gaze never leaving his face. "Hurry is the enemy of wisdom. Before you step onto that bus, take a moment. Say a prayer. The road is not always as safe as it seems." David hesitated. His mother had always told him similar things, but he had never taken them too seriously. Now, hearing the same warning from a complete stranger made the hairs on his arms rise. "Thank you, Ma," he said, trying to brush off the conversation. "I'll be fine." The woman sighed, as if she had seen this before. "You remind me of my own son." He never listened either. She didn't elaborate, but her words carried a heavy weight. David nodded politely and continued toward the bus, but her words lingered. He wasn't a superstitious man, but why did it feel like everything was pointing him toward caution? As he reached the bus, he pulled out his phone and called his mother. She picked up almost instantly, her voice filled with warmth. "David, my son. Are you on your way?" "Yes, Mama. I'm about to board," he said. "Have you prayed?" she asked immediately. David sighed. "Mama, you always ask me that." "And I will always ask," she said firmly. "Prayer is not just a habit, it is protection. Do you know how many people have left their homes, never to return? My son, do not rely only on the driver's skill. Rely on God's hand." David rubbed his forehead. "Mama, I'll be fine. Promise me, at least, that you will say a short prayer before the bus leaves," she pleaded. Her voice was so full of love and concern that David found himself nodding, even though she couldn't see him. "All right, Mama. I promise." "Good," she said, relieved. "May God watch over you." As he ended the call, he sighed, shaking his head with a small smile. His mother would never change. Still, as he climbed onto the bus, he found himself sitting quietly for a moment. The bus was filling up quickly, and the engine roared to life. He looked around at the other passengers. Some were chatting, others lost in thought. A man across from him had his eyes closed, murmuring what seemed to be a quiet prayer. David hesitated, then exhaled deeply. It wouldn't hurt, right? He closed his eyes and whispered, "God, if there is danger ahead, protect me." It was a simple prayer, quick and almost reluctant, but at least he had kept his promise. Little did he know, it would make all the difference. David settled into his seat, adjusting his bag beside him as he glanced around the bus. It was nearly full now, with passengers of all kinds, some quiet and observant, others loud and carefree. A mother in the front seat tried to calm her crying baby while a group of young men near the back laughed and shared stories. A middle-aged man dressed in a suit sat across from David, his fingers flipping through a newspaper as if he had done this 1,000 times before. The bus driver finally climbed into his seat, a stocky man with a stern face and an air of impatience. His fingers drummed on the steering wheel as he waited for the last passengers to settle. He didn't look like the type to tolerate delays. "All right, everybody hold on," he called out gruffly. "We're already late." With a loud groan of the engine, the bus lurched forward, jerking slightly before picking up speed. David leaned his head against the window, watching as the city streets slowly faded into rural landscapes. The tall buildings were replaced by vast fields and scattered trees, the roads stretching endlessly ahead. He had always enjoyed traveling by road, the scenery constantly changing, a reminder of how big the world was outside his daily routine. But something about this journey felt different. The bus moved fast, too fast. The driver seemed determined to make up for lost time, overtaking slower vehicles with little hesitation. Each time he swerved, a murmur would ripple through the passengers, some glancing at each other with unease. David himself tightened his grip on the armrest, his mind flashing back to the dream he had the night before. He shook off the thought. It was just a coincidence. The passengers settled into their own routines, some dozing off, others chatting quietly. A woman beside David pulled out her rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer. He wondered if she always did that, or if she, too, felt the strange weight of unease lingering in the air. A man sitting near the window hummed a gospel song under his breath, his voice barely audible over the engine's growl. It was a familiar tune, one David's mother often played at home. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. David let out a deep breath. Maybe his mother was right. Maybe he should pray again, just to be safe. But before he could, the bus lurched sharply to the side as the driver swerved around a pothole at high speed. Driver, take it easy, a man shouted from the back. The driver scoffed but didn't slow down. If you want to drive, come and take the wheel, he muttered. A nervous chuckle passed through a few passengers, but most exchanged worried glances. David clenched his jaw. He had taken this route before, and he knew there were many sharp bends ahead. At this speed, a single miscalculation could be dangerous. The driver continued to push the limits, overtaking cars with reckless abandon. Another pothole sent a jolt through the bus, causing a few people to cry out. The baby in the front seat started wailing again, the mother struggling to soothe it. David felt his heart pounding faster now. He turned to the woman beside him, the one clutching her rosary. "Do you always pray before you travel?" he asked suddenly. She looked up, surprised by the question. "Always," she said simply. "The road is full of unseen dangers. Only God sees what lies ahead." David nodded slowly, her words echoing what his mother had told him that morning. He turned back to the window, watching as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Shadows stretched across the road, the once beautiful landscape now taking on an eerie quality. Then, out of nowhere, a loud bang sounded from beneath the bus. The driver cursed, fighting to keep control as the bus wobbled violently. The passengers screamed, some grabbing onto their seats as the vehicle swerved dangerously to the side. David's stomach lurched. His mind raced back to his dream, the out-of-control bus, the screeching metal, the overwhelming terror. And then it happened. The bus hit a sharp turn too fast. The tires screeched against the asphalt as the driver yanked the steering wheel, but it was too late. The bus tilted dangerously, the force of the sudden movement throwing passengers forward. Time seemed to slow. David heard the sound of shattering glass, the cries of terror, the screech of the bus sliding uncontrollably. He felt his body lifted, weightless for a split second before. Crash. Then, everything went black. The moment happened in an instant, yet it felt like slow motion. 1 second, the bus was speeding down the road, passengers gripping their seats in nervous anticipation. The next, a loud bang ripped through the air, followed by the gut-wrenching screech of tires skidding uncontrollably. David's breath caught in his throat. His fingers dug into the armrest as the bus jolted violently to the side. The driver yanked the wheel, but the momentum was too strong. The tires lost grip, the weight of the bus shifting dangerously. Passengers screamed. David's heart pounded as the vehicle tipped to the right, metal grinding against the pavement. A horrifying cracking sound split the air as the window shattered. Fragments of glass rained down, catching the fading sunlight like sharp diamonds. The bus flipped, first onto its side, then rolling completely over. Bodies were thrown like rag dolls. David felt himself lifted from his seat, his head slamming against the ceiling before he crashed hard onto the window beside him. A flash of pain shot through his ribs. He gasped, but the air was thick with dust, choking his lungs. A woman's scream was cut short as the bus slammed into something solid. A tree, a barrier, the ground. David didn't know. The impact sent another jolt through his body. He reached out blindly, his fingers scraping against shattered glass. Then, silence. The only sound was the distant ringing in David's ears. Somewhere, a car horn blared endlessly. The air was thick with the smell of burnt rubber, spilled fuel, and blood. David's vision blurred. Shadows moved in the wreckage, groans of pain breaking the eerie quiet. Who had survived? Who hadn't? David's world faded in and out, the pain in his body dulling and sharpening like waves crashing against a shore. He wasn't sure if he was alive or dead. Everything felt distant, like a dream slipping through his fingers. Somewhere in the wreckage, he could hear muffled voices, people groaning, crying, calling for help. His own breath was ragged, shallow, his chest rising and falling with difficulty. Then, suddenly, there was silence. A strange warmth surrounded him, soft and comforting, like a gentle embrace. The chaos of the accident seemed to disappear, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. He felt weightless, as if he were floating above everything. Then he saw it, a bright light in the distance. It wasn't blinding, but rather soft and inviting, pulling him in. In that moment, all of his pain, fear, and confusion melted away. He felt lighter than air, his worries lifting from his shoulders. Voices echoed around him, calling his name. Some were familiar, others foreign. He turned, searching for the source, but there was nothing, only the light stretching endlessly before him. Then, out of the glow, a voice broke through. David. It was gentle yet firm, filled with emotion. He knew that voice. He turned and suddenly, he wasn't in the wreckage anymore. He wasn't in the light either. Instead, he found himself standing in his childhood home. Everything was exactly as he remembered, the worn-out couch, the wooden table, the small TV in the corner. The scent of his mother's cooking lingered in the air. And there she was. His mother knelt on the floor, her hands tightly clasped in prayer. Tears streaked her face as she whispered fervent words to God. Lord, please protect my son. Wherever he is, whatever danger he is in, do not let harm come to him. Cover him with your mercy, Lord. David's chest tightened. His mother's voice trembled with desperation, her body shaking as she pleaded. He had seen her pray before, but never like this. It was as if she could feel what was happening to him, as if her soul was reaching out to his. She knew. She knew he was in danger. David wanted to call out to her, to tell her he was here, that he could hear her. But as he stepped forward, the warmth around him shifted. The light flickered. The image of his mother blurred, fading like mist. No, wait, he tried to shout, but his voice didn't come out. A sharp pain yanked him backward. Suddenly, he wasn't standing in his childhood home anymore. He was back in the wreckage, the suffocating weight of reality crashing down on him. The light was gone, replaced by the dim, dusty remains of the overturned bus. The screams returned. The smell of fuel and blood filled his nostrils. David gasped, his body jerking as consciousness slammed into him. A blurry figure leaned over him. He's alive. This one is alive. His vision swam. A flashing red light. The sound of sirens wailing in the distance. Pain pulsed through his body, but he clung to it. He was here. He was alive. And somewhere, his mother's prayers had reached him. David drifted in and out of consciousness, the beeping of machines and hushed voices pulling him back into the world. His body ached as if he had been crushed under a mountain, but he was breathing. He was alive. Blinking, he turned his head slightly, wincing at the pain. Bright hospital lights glared down at him. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled his nostrils, a stark contrast to the smoky scent of wreckage that still lingered in his mind. For a moment, he struggled to piece together what had happened. Then, it hit him. The crash. His breath caught in his throat as flashes of the accident flooded his memory. The screech of tires. The violent rolling. The screams. The silence afterward. He had seen something, or had it been real? His mother, praying for him. The light. That warmth. A heavy wave of emotion swelled inside him, but before he could dwell on it, a nurse entered the room. She was a kind-looking woman with tired eyes, holding a clipboard. "You're awake," she said gently, offering a small smile. "You've been unconscious for nearly a day. We were worried about you." David swallowed, his throat dry. "The others, what happened?" The nurse hesitated, her face shifting slightly. "The rescue team did everything they could." She glanced toward the window, where beyond the glass, the sun was setting in hues of orange and gold. Then, she met his gaze again. "Some people survived. Others didn't make it." David's stomach twisted. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a slow breath. He had known the answer before he asked, but hearing it out loud made it real. The nurse continued. The emergency response team arrived as fast as they could. They pulled survivors from the wreckage, working through the night. You were one of the lucky ones. Lucky. David thought about the people on the bus, the woman holding her child, the elderly man who had nodded off, the group of students chatting about their future plans. Had they all made it? Or were they among the ones who had been lost? Guilt crept into his chest. Why had he been spared when others hadn't? As if reading his thoughts, the nurse placed a hand on his shoulder. You've been given another chance. I don't know what you believe in, but someone up there must have been watching over you. David exhaled slowly, his mind drifting back to his mother's prayer. Maybe it hadn't just been luck. Tears welled in his eyes, and he let them fall. Not just for himself, but for those who hadn't survived. For the lives lost in the crash, for the families grieving, for the second chance he had been given. As he lay there, he made a silent vow to never take another moment for granted. To pray before every journey, to trust in the unseen forces that had protected him. Because now he understood. Faith wasn't just about belief. It was about surrender. About trusting in a power greater than himself. And on that day, in that hospital bed, David did just that. David sat in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, deep in thought. The weight of everything that had happened settled over him like a heavy blanket. He had come so close to death, so close to never seeing his family again. And yet, he was here. Alive. Breathing. The door creaked open, and he turned to see his mother step inside. Her face was lined with worry, her eyes red from sleepless nights and endless prayers. The moment she saw him awake, she gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. David, she whispered, as if afraid he might disappear if she spoke too loudly. Tears blurred his vision as she rushed to his side, wrapping him in a trembling embrace. Thank God, she sobbed. Thank God you're alive. David held onto her tightly, feeling the warmth of her love surround him. He had seen her praying for him, whether in a vision or something beyond explanation, he didn't know. But he knew, without a doubt, that her prayers had reached him. When she pulled back, she cupped his face, searching his eyes. I knew something was wrong. That's why I prayed for you. I begged God to protect you. David swallowed hard. I know, Mama. His voice was thick with emotion. I saw you. I don't know how, but I saw you praying for me. His mother's lips trembled, fresh tears falling. That was God, my son. He was with you. He spared you. David nodded, overwhelmed by the truth of her words. He had been given a second chance, not by luck, but by divine intervention. He had ignored the warnings, dismissed the signs. But in the moment of disaster, when life and death hung in the balance, prayer had pulled him back. He reached for his mother's hand and squeezed it. I understand now. Life is fragile. Anything can happen in an instant. But God is real, Mama. His protection is real. His mother smiled, brushing his forehead gently. Now you know why I always say a prayer before every journey. David let out a small, shaky laugh. I used to think it didn't matter. That it was just a habit. He looked into her wise eyes, his voice filled with conviction. But I'll never take it lightly again. I'll never travel without prayer. His mother nodded approvingly. That's all I ever wanted for you, to know that God is watching, that He listens. David exhaled, feeling a weight lift from his heart. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. From that day forward, he vowed to live differently, to appreciate life, to walk with faith, and to never forget the power of prayer. Because now he knew prayer wasn't just words. It was protection. It was a shield. And it was the reason he was still alive.